with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I am pleased to move on to our next presenter, John Stasio. I'm going to take a little plug because we have USEA has enjoyed the relationship with John for many years. It started when he was still with SMUD. It is instrumental in a lot of the work that we did under Energy Partnership Program. John played a key role in working with our partners in Brazil, Botswana, India, and Jordan. And if I do say so myself, we were so pleased by that, the work he did, that we gave him our Volunteer of the Year award in 2013. So it's a pleasure to have John with us today. So please let me introduce John Stasio, President of the Large Public Power Council. John, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Marjorie. It's great to see you again. Yeah, I really enjoyed my time in affiliation with USEA. It's a wonderful organization that it's those exchanges not only provide a great opportunity to share our learnings, but to actually learn from others and the challenges and the interests, although the technology may be different in terms of its advancement, but the interests in terms of serving communities and providing electricity and economic development and environmental stewardship, those are all common interests, and so that's terrific. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the organization I represent, and we're part of the energy ecosystem, but we're also larger public power members. So I represent the Large Public Power Council, and that involves 27 members in 21 states, and collectively we serve about 30 million consumers. So we're all municipal utilities. We're all part of the American Public Power Association, who's our national trade association, but there are a few discrete issues that uniquely affect larger systems. And so from that, we have some metropolitan areas you might recognize: Los Angeles, Sacramento, Seattle, New York City, Orlando. So we're all across the country, and some of these larger municipals come together 3 times a year, and we meet the CEOs or our board members, and we talk frequently about what is changing and what's on the horizon for our industry. And of course, you know, it's easy to say that we're all in the midst of change, but frankly, we've been in the midst of change for several years now. I will say there's one theme that to me is probably becoming clearer and clearer, and that is convergence of technology, convergence of consumer interests, and convergence of policy. Perhaps in the past, our members were more responsive to policy, and so policy would lead, and consumer interests and perhaps how we deployed technology would follow. Now, I would say that technology and consumer interests tend to drive a lot more of what our members are focused on. First of all, being municipal and consumer-owned utilities, they're directly accountable and responsive to the communities they serve and the constituents they serve. And so over time, people have become more interested in matters related to climate change impacts. They've seen how technology has transformed their convenience and their life and their optionality in other sectors. They want the same thing in energy. So a lot of those things are driving what our members are seeing. Now, granted, decarbonization has been an effort that's an interest of all of our members, and that's probably the end game for everything that is focusing a lot of our attention and investment right now. We're looking at whether it's electrification of transportation, whether it's the need for additional resilience given increased weather events and the severity of the weather events, and the fact that we're in a digital society now where people don't tolerate lengthy outages and really want the standard to be more like what they experience in other utility service. So we've gone through administration to administration, they have different focuses on how they want to approach climate, and the efforts of those administrations, unfortunately, don't always line up with how utilities plan. Historically, utilities take a long view and they plan for many, many years. And so we can't plan around 4-year election cycles and where things might go. And you don't want to try to guess at that. And so basically, we're all on a path to say decarbonization is a reality. It's something that our consumers want. What are the barriers to getting there, and what are the technologies that'll enhance our ability to get there? So a couple of those where our folks are focused right now are the convergence, as I mentioned, is a big topic. You look at something like the storm Uri that occurred, and that really pointed out the interdependence of gas and electric. And there's other interdependencies as well, but those interdependencies really are forcing us to have to rethink how we regulate critical infrastructure, how critical infrastructure operators work together, and also how we start to think about things a little bit more holistically. I would argue even the regulatory construct is siloed. Our industries are siloed, but more and more technology is forcing those gaps to be bridged. And then when you think about decarbonization, it's not going to land in one industry. It's got to be economy wide. So there's going to have to be ways for us to start to wrestle with this idea of interdependence, convergence, and also looking at a much more integrated view of how we deliver our services being just part of the total picture. As you start to see the convergence of electricity as a fuel and the growing consumer interest and optionality in auto makers that are going electric, yes, it's a great opportunity for the electricity sector to grow its load, but it's also brings with it a need to think differently about how we're going to decarbonize as we grow versus decarbonizing when perhaps your loads are flat or shrinking. The other thing is that we need to look at that not just within our silo, but in an integrated fashion. There's organizations that are starting to do this. There's the California Mobility Center I'm familiar with in Sacramento that is looking at creating a commercialization collaborative where you have all of the parts of the ecosystem in there. So electrification, electricity as a mobility fuel, all of those are things that I think are very much on our members' radar screen for the upcoming year and beyond. So the other thing we start to look at is resilience, and that's going to take a level of digitization, the deployment of technologies in different ways down into the distribution system. The way I would argue it is that the bulk electric system at the transmission and generation level is very smart, but the distribution system has not been as interoperable and has not been as accessible. So deploying more technology in the distribution system to allow more interoperability with consumers, but also more situational awareness and visibility as we start to get not just end uses, but more devices on the distribution system that aren't just a load point, but also could be a generation point. And so these things are all part of what I would tie into grid modernization. And then maybe the last thing I would talk about some is the fact that when we look at this convergence, it really drives us to think about conversations, certainly with policymakers, but conversations also in industries and with third parties that historically haven't been part of the planning paradigm, and doing more of this together is going to be critically important, especially when you start to think about, as we digitize more, we also have to handle issues related to cyber and the supply chain. Many of those are being looked at right now, and those are things that we're talking to the federal regulators about, as well as state regulators, about how do we continue the transformation that's underway? How do we make the system much more flexible, much more interoperable, and much more accessible, and do so in a way that also preserves security and reliability? So when I think about the things that are on the horizon, I will say the bipartisan infrastructure bill has a lot of great federal contribution towards, whether it's DOE or DOT grants or sharing opportunities that will allow our members to do things like grid modernization or prepare for electrification. And as that rolls out over the next couple of years, that could be very transformative in nature and very, very helpful in terms of taking us down the path, the next step. But we're not certain what may happen in the legislative arena, given there's some headwinds for the Build Back Better right now. But we do believe that there will be a lot of activity in the regulatory arena. FERC is looking at revisiting transmission. Obviously, EPA at some point will take up successor to the Clean Power Plan and ACE rules. And so we're expecting 2022 to be a significant year for regulatory action. But again, the things that are really driving our members are the things that I mentioned. We're trying to do everything we can to advance decarbonization, look at things like electrification, besides cleaning up our own resource mix, looking at additional investments in energy efficiency, greater digitization for greater access and interoperability, and then looking at resilience and reliability. And I would make cyber a piece of that. So I'm happy to take any questions. And I apologize, Marjorie, I'm not sure how long exactly I had, but hopefully that gives adequate time for some questions.
It does give adequate time for questions, John, and I thank you so much for that and for your presentation. I was interested to hear your thoughts about how moving forward you're kind of taking more of a holistic approach. So I'm very interested to hear about that, and I might follow that up a little bit with a question. But first, I want to talk a little bit about this decarbonization that you mentioned. And one of the questions I had was, how do you see the transportation sector evolving over the next decade?
Well, I think one of the things that is interesting, there was an organization that was put together by the Alliance to Save Energy, and it was called the 50 by 50 Commission, and I was fortunate to be a commissioner on that group. And there was several, again, representatives from different industries, whether it was government, education, automakers. And one of the things that was very interesting to me is, while the electric sector is thinking about how to become an electric fuel provider for transportation, the transportation sector is still looking headlong at things like autonomous vehicles, shared ownership. So their paradigm is changing at the very same time. Their go-to-market strategies and some of the things that we could be seeing beyond just electric vehicles are very much in the mind of automakers. So again, that just points to the need for us to do more shared thinking about the future, so we make sure we get the ecosystem right and we don't miss the mark. I think most of our contribution right now would be to make sure that that there's adequate charging infrastructure. If there's going to be opportunities to electrify beyond light duty vehicles, what that may look like, and to make sure that we have a clean and very simple planning visibility, so that people that are proposing to do private development of charging stations or other types of infrastructure for electric transportation that we're supporting that. And again, it's a big focus right now, and it's something that I think is going to grow exponentially, because I think now the consumers are driving it, and it's not driven solely by policy.
Thank you for that, John. I also want to go back to a comment you made in which you said that you feel 2022 will be covered a lot by regulation and policy moving forward. So I want to ask the question on the Biden administration is attempting to revise federal investment tax credits to ensure that municipal utilities like public power are eligible. Can you talk a little bit about these efforts?
Yeah, sure. So there's a whole host of energy tax incentives that were part and parcel to the Build Back Better proposal. And while they may get split off, again, I don't know exactly what happens with BBB right now, because it's, as everybody knows, it's got some headwinds, but it certainly could be revisited. But it's some of those credits are very important to us, because as municipal utilities, our primary financing mechanism is tax exempt finance. And to the extent that there are tax incentives delivered through the tax code, if they're only delivered through the tax code and we're nonprofits, we can't access them. So having direct pay alternatives similar to the Build America bonds that were available in the Obama administration, or other means by which we can have comparable access. It won't be the same access because, again, we're not tax-paying entities. However, there are direct pay mechanisms that were envisioned in the Build Back Better, and part of that proposal. There's also other means of comparability. And I think those are things that are of keen interest to us, and we're going to continue to watch that carefully and hope that if there are new investments that are advanced by the federal government through the tax code, that they have also comparable types of incentives that can be delivered outside of the tax code through direct pay, so that municipal issuers and municipal investment can be on an equal footing.
Thank you, John. I want to ask one last question. I'm going to take liberty as the moderator, so I hope no one gets upset. As we continue to go into this, seems another year under this uncertainty of COVID, I was interested in knowing how the pandemic has impacted your workforce over the last few years.
Yeah, it's been, boy, like everybody, early on when we didn't know exactly what was going to happen, and obviously you have an obligation to keep the lights on. So a lot of it was around, we actually sequestered critical employees in place, stood up significant testing regimes, worked on personal protective equipment, masks, and so forth. And a lot of the workforce still remains remote today. Those that are able to work remote through technology continue to do so. And I think it's not clear to me what the new work environment will look like, but I can probably say with certainty it will not be the same as it was pre-COVID. And my guess is some large percentage will still work remotely, because we've learned that the productivity isn't hampered and there's an ability to do certain things. I do see some of our members starting to move to more of a hybrid, where people come in certain days, which could be important for onboarding or building a culture or leadership development. But certainly it's been something that was not envisioned, and we ramped up. I'm very proud of our industry sector, because we did maintain reliability, and we did make sure that those employees that are critical to doing so, we had really good ways to keep them safe, keep them tested, and make sure that we could keep the people on the job. And now, as we start to look at perhaps on the horizon, hopefully on the horizon, we do start to give way to something that looks a little bit more like pre-COVID. Now I think the focus is going to be how do you have more of a hybrid work environment than what we had in the past.
Thank you for John. I was very interested in asking that question because it's a discussion that we have with a lot of our overseas utilities. So thank you very much for that. We haven't gone too far off schedule by me taking the liberty of asking that final question. As always, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for presenting your insight, and we look forward to continued work with you and the council as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Marjorie. Good to see you.
You as well. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.